Welcome to our deep dive, and this one's pretty personal, I gotta say. We're tackling Augustine's Confessions, which isn't really your typical autobiography, you know. It's more of a conversation with God, where Augustine kind of reflects on his life, struggles, and, you know, that whole path to faith thing.
And you know what makes Confessions so interesting, even all these centuries later, is how it dives into, well, these like timeless questions, you know? Faith, doubt, good, evil.
Right.
I mean, we all wrestle with this stuff at some point.
Totally. And the cool thing is, he doesn't shy away from the messy parts, you know?
Yeah.
Like right off the bat in Book I, you see Augustine
Yeah.
as this, well, kind of mischievous kid. The story that always gets me is the one about the stolen pears. He's not stealing because he's hungry or anything. It's just for the thrill of doing something wrong. Why do you think that is?
I think that story really gets at Augustine's like early struggle with sin. You know, he's questioning why people choose evil even when it doesn't really benefit them, right? It's like he's almost fascinated by this darkness inside him, even though it kind of freaks him out.
Yeah. Definitely not your typical saint story.
Right.
And this whole fascination with like the darker parts of being human leads him down some pretty interesting paths. Like he spends a chunk of his youth as a follower of Manichaeism. Can you like break that down for us?
Sure. So Manichaeism, it was this religion that offered a really simple view of the universe, you know? Just this cosmic battle between light and dark, good versus evil, like two equal forces forever fighting.
Okay.
And this appealed to young Augustine because it gave him easy answers, like a black and white way to see the world, you know?
Makes sense. I mean, everyone wants simple answers, especially when you're young and looking for meaning. But as he gets older, Augustine starts seeing the problems with this Manichaean view.
Right.
It seems like this disillusionment kind of starts when he meets Faustus, this big deal Manichaean bishop. What happened there?
Well, Faustus had this rep for being brilliant, you know? Augustine was expecting some huge revelation, some answers to all the questions bugging him.
Right.
But when they actually met, Augustine found Faustus's arguments kind of shallow, not really satisfying.
So instead of answers, he just ends up with more doubts.
That was rough.
Yeah, it was a turning point for him. It forced him to realize he couldn't just accept easy answers anymore. He had to really grapple with these big questions about good, evil, truth, you know, the whole deal.
And that struggle eventually takes him down a completely different path towards Christianity.
Exactly.
And that leads us to, I mean, one of the most famous parts of Confessions, that dramatic conversion in the garden, Book 8, right?
Yeah, this is where you see Augustine just totally wrestling with himself, tormented by his past, by his inability to just be good. And then in this moment of pure despair, he hears this kid's voice chanting, "Tolle lege," which means take up and read.
Whoa.
Okay, so he takes it as like a sign, opens the Bible randomly, and lands on this passage from Romans 13.1 through 14, right?
Yeah, urging people to live a life worthy of the light.
And boom, everything changes.
Exactly. It's amazing how one little thing can totally shift your perspective.
It really is. And for Augustine, this whole conversion thing leads to a huge change in how he understands evil. He ditches that Manichaean idea of evil being like this separate force and instead develops this whole concept of evil as like an absence of good.
Right.
So this idea of evil as an absence, that's like at the core of his philosophy. Could you like unpack that a little more?
Sure. It's subtle, but it's deep, you know? Think of it like this. Darkness, it's not really a thing itself.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the absence of light. In the same way, evil for Augustine, it's not some separate entity, but a lack of goodness, a turning away from God. It's like this emptiness where love, virtue, truth should be.
So it's like a deficiency, not some powerful force on its own.
Exactly. And this idea changes how we see our actions, the choices we make, how we view the problems in the world. It suggests that evil isn't something controlling us from outside, but something that happens when we turn away from good, from God. It really makes you think differently about your own life, huh? Like, if evil is turning away from good, then we actually have the power to choose good, to like fill that emptiness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty empowering when you think about it. It puts the responsibility back on us, you know, our choices and all. But I'm curious, how does Augustine actually show this whole evil as absence thing in Confessions? Any specific examples?
Oh, yeah, tons. Remember that pear story we talked about? Augustine steals those pears, not because he needs them. He doesn't even want them, really.
Right.
It's just because he knows it's wrong. He's drawn to the act itself, like the thrill of breaking the rules.
So even as a kid, he's messing with this idea of turning away from good, huh? like he's testing the limits of his own morality.
Yeah, exactly. And that keeps going throughout Confessions. He talks about how even chasing knowledge and success, it was kind of driven by this emptiness, this absence of good. Like he was trying to find fulfillment in things that don't last.
That's interesting because it's not like knowledge or success are bad things in themselves.
Right. Yeah.
It's more about why we want them, how much we prioritize them. That's where it gets tricky.
Exactly. That's Augustine's whole point. When we turn away from God, when those worldly things become our main goal, they kind of become this substitute for real fulfillment, a distraction from what actually matters.
It makes you wonder, like, how much of our own ambition, all that striving, is coming from that same kind of emptiness?
Yeah.
Are we filling the void with the right stuff?
It's a big question Augustine throws at us. And Confessions is full of these moments where he's like examining himself, trying to figure out what's driving his desires.
It's what makes Augustine so relatable even now,
Yeah.
All that struggling, questioning, searching for the truth. But I gotta admit, this evil as absence thing, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes. Are there any other examples from Confessions that could help?
Sure. There's this part where Augustine talks about how deeply he grieved when his close friend died. And he realizes that even that grief, as natural as it was kind of a turning away from God. He was clinging to his friend's memory instead of finding comfort in his faith.
Oh, wow. I mean, grief is a natural human thing. It's not bad in itself, right?
Right, but it's when it consumes you, when it's all you can see and it stops you from seeing beyond the pain. That's when it becomes a problem.
I see. So Augustine's seeing this pattern in lots of human experiences, huh?
Yeah, like chasing pleasure, wanting power, being attached to material things. All that stuff can become evil when it takes over, when it fills the space where our love and devotion should be.
So it's about recognizing those messed up desires, those wrong attachments, and focusing on what actually feeds our souls. It's like constantly adjusting, turning back towards the good.
And Augustine thought this wasn't just a personal thing. It affects how we see society, too. All the bad stuff, injustice, violence, greed, he saw it all coming from that same root. Turning away from God, lacking love and compassion.
So it's not like there's some evil force out there causing all the problems.
Yep.
It's more about an emptiness inside us, a collective lack of those things that hold us together.
Exactly. And that's actually kind of hopeful, because it means we can change things. We can fix those problems by building up those good qualities in ourselves and our communities. It's about filling that void with love, justice, compassion.
So it's like Augustine's giving us this challenge, right? If evil's a lack of good, then it's our job to fill that gap in ourselves and the world, too.
Yeah. And he doesn't just leave us hanging. Throughout Confessions, he talks about ways we can build up that goodness. And one of the more surprising ones is, through beauty.
Oh, right. You said earlier that Augustine saw a strong connection between, like, beauty and being good. Can you expand on that a bit?
So for Augustine, real beauty reflects God's goodness. It reminds us of this divine spark inside all creation.
Okay.
And when we experience beauty, when it really moves us, it pulls us closer to God.
So it's not just looking at something pretty. It's like letting that beauty really sink in, wake something up inside us.
Exactly. He even says that something as simple as watching a sunset can be a form of worship, a way to connect with God.
That's a cool thought.
Right.
It makes me think about those times you're out in nature and you're suddenly hit by how beautiful a flower is or the sounds of birds. It's like this little reminder that there's something bigger going on.
Augustine would say those moments aren't just random, They're chances for us to see God's presence in the world, to fill that emptiness inside with something good.
So it goes beyond rituals and debates.
Yeah.
It's about paying attention to beauty in all its forms.
And what's interesting is that Augustine didn't just stick to religious stuff. He thought even art, if it's honest and real, could point us towards truth and good.
So it's not so much what the art's about, but more about the artist's intentions,
Yeah.
like how they use their skills to make you feel something deeper.
Right. For Augustine, real beauty can change you, no matter what form it takes. It wakes us up to that divine part of ourselves, reminds us we're connected to something bigger.
It's a hopeful message, know? Even with all the darkness and bad stuff in the world, beauty can heal, inspire, guide us back to good.
And that's really what makes Confessions so powerful. It's not just some theological book or history lesson. It's this really human story about searching for meaning and truth, something that still speaks to people today.
And as we've seen, it's a wild ride, full of dark moments and bright ones. But through it all, there's this belief that people can choose good, overcome their limits, find their way back to that ultimate source of goodness.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from Confessions, that even when we mess up, even when we fall, we can always come back, turn towards the light.
What a great way to end our deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored Augustine's Confessions. Hopefully it's inspired you to start your own journey of exploring and figuring things out.